Hey everyone, and welcome to Real Talk Grimm Edition. I'm your host Josh, and this is the place where we dive into the dark, whimsical world of the Brothers Grimm. Whether you're a longtime fan of fairy tales or just starting to discover them, you're in the right spot. Each episode, I'll read a classic Grimm's fairy tale and then explore its deeper meanings, lessons, and how it may apply to our modern culture. From the well-known stories like Cinderella to more obscure ones that still carry a punch, we're going to get into what makes these tales so timeless and sometimes downright eerie. But this isn't just about reading stories. It's about peeling back the layers and looking at what these stories really teach us. The Grimm brothers didn't shy away from showing the darker side of life. And in many ways, those darker elements hold some of the most powerful messages. Whether it's about good versus evil, human nature, or just the consequences of choices. So whether you're here for the ride of a familiar story or to uncover something you haven't heard before, stick with me as we explore the fascinating and sometimes twisted world of Grimm's fairy tales. Today, I'll be reading Tom Thumb. So grab your favorite drink, sit back, and enjoy the tale. Tom Thumb. There was once a poor peasant who sat in the evening by the hearth and poked the fire, and his wife sat and span. Then he said, "How sad is it that we have no children? With us all is so quiet, and in other houses it is noisy and lively." "Yes," replied the wife, and sighed, "even if we had only one, and it were quite small, and only as big as a thumb, I should be quite satisfied, and we would still love it with all our hearts." Now, it so happened that the woman fell ill and, after 7 months, gave birth to a child that was perfect in all its limbs, but no longer than a thumb. "Then," said they, "it is as we wished it to be, and it shall be our dear child." And because of its size, they called it Tom Thumb. They did not let it want for food, for the child did not grow taller, but remained as it had been at their first. Nevertheless, it took sensibly out its eyes, and soon showed itself to be a wise and nimble creature, for everything it did turned out well. One day the peasant was getting ready to go into the forest to cut wood, when he said, as if to himself, "How I wish that there was anyone who could bring the cart to me." "Oh, father," cried Tom Thumb, "I will soon bring the cart, rely on that. It shall be in the forest at the appointed time." The man smiled and said, "How can that be done? Thou art far too small to lead the horse by the reins." "That is of no consequence, father. If my mother will only harness it, I shall sit in the horse's ear and call out to him how he is to go." "Well," answered the man, "for once we will try it." When the time came, the mother harnessed the horse and placed Tom Thumb in its ear. And then the little creature cried, "Gee up! Gee up!" Then it went quite properly, as if with its master, and the cart went the right way into the forest. It so happened that just as he was turning a corner and the little one was crying, "Gee up!" 2 strange men came towards him. "My word," said one of them, "what is this? There is a cart coming, and a driver is calling to the horse, and still he is not to be seen." "That can't be right," said the other. "We will follow the cart and see where it stops." The cart, however, drove right into the forest and exactly to the place where the wood had been cut. When Tom Thumb saw his father, he cried to him, "Seest thou, father, here I am with the cart. Now take me down." The father got hold of the horse with his left hand, and with the right took his little son out of the ear. Tom Thumb sat down quite merrily on a straw. But when the 2 strange men saw him, they did not know what to say for astonishment. Then one of them took the other aside and said, Hark, the little fellow would make our fortune if we exhibited him in a large town for money. We will buy him." They went to the peasant and said, "Sell us the little man. He shall be well treated with us." "No," replied the father, "he is the apple of my eye, and all the money in the world cannot buy him from me." Tom Thumb, however, when he heard the bargain, had crept up the folds of his father's coat, placed himself on his shoulder, and whispered in his father's ear, "Father, do give me away. I will soon come back again." Then the father parted with him to the two men for a handsome bit of money. "Where wilt thou sit?" they said to him. "Oh, just set me on the rim of your hat, and then I can walk backwards and forwards and look at the country, and still not fall down." They did as he wished, and when Tom Thumb had taken leave of his father, they went away with him. They walked until it was dark, and then the little fellow said, "Do take me down, I want to come down." The man took his hat off and put the little fellow on the ground by the wayside, and he leapt and crept about a little between the sods, and then he suddenly slipped into a mouse hole which he had sought out. "Good evening, gentlemen. Just go home without me," he cried to them and mocked them. They ran thither and stuck their sticks into the mouse hole, but it was all lost labor. Tom Thumb crept farther in, and as it soon became quite dark, they were forced to go home with their vexation and their empty purses. When Tom Thumb saw that they were gone, he crept back out of the subterranean passage. "It is so dangerous to walk on the ground in the dark," said he. "How easily a neck or leg is broken." Fortunately, he knocked against an empty snail shell. "Thank God," said he, "in that I can pass the night safely," and got into it. Not long afterwards, when he was just going to sleep, he heard two men go by, and one of them was saying, "How shall we contrive to get hold of the rich pastor's silver and gold?" "I could tell thee that," cried Tom Thumb, interrupting them. "What was that?" said one of the thieves in fright. "I heard someone speaking." They stood still listening, and Tom Thumb spoke again and said, "Take me with you, and I'll help you." "But where art thou?" "Just look on the ground and observe from whence my voice comes," he replied. There the thieves at length found him and lifted him up. "Thou little imp, how wilt thou help us?" they said. "A great deal," said he. "I will creep into the pastor's room through the iron bars, and will reach out to you whatever you want to have." "Come then," they said, "and we will see what thou canst do." When they got to the pastor's house, Tom Thumb crept into the room, but instantly cried out with all his might, "Do you want to have everything that is here?" The thieves were alarmed and said, "But do speak softly so as not to waken anyone." Tom Thumb, however, behaved as if he had not understood this, and cried again, "What do you want? Do you want to have everything that is here?" The cook, who slept in the next room, heard this and sat up in bed and listened. The thieves, however, had in their fright run some distance away. But at last they took courage and thought, "The little rascal wants to mock us?" They came back and whispered to him, "Come, be serious, and reach something out to us." Then Tom Thumb again cried as loudly as he could, "I really will give you everything, just put out your hands." The maid, who was listening, heard this quite distinctly, and jumped out of bed and rushed to the door. The thieves took fright and ran as if the wild huntsmen were behind them. But as the maid could not see anything, she went to strike a light. When she came to the place with it, Tom Thumb, unperceived, betook himself to the granary, and the maid, after she had examined every corner and found nothing, lay down in her bed again and believed that, after all, she had only been dreaming with open eyes and ears. Tom Thumb had climbed up among the hay and found a beautiful place to sleep in. There he intended to rest until day and then go home again to his parents. But he had other things to go through. Truly, there is much affliction and misery in the world. When day dawned, the maid arose from her bed to feed the cows. Her first walk was into the barn, where she laid hold of an armful of hay, and precisely that very one in which poor Tom Thumb was lying asleep. He, however, was sleeping so soundly that he was unaware of anything, and did not awake until he was in the mouth of the cow, who had picked him up with the hay. "Ah, heavens!" cried he, "how have I got into the fulling mill?" But he soon discovered where he was. Then it was necessary to be careful not to let himself go between the teeth and be dismembered, but he was, nevertheless, forced to slip down into the stomach with the hay. "In this little room the windows are forgotten," said he, "and no sun shines in, neither will a candle be brought." His quarters were specially unpleasing to him, and the worst was, more and more hay was always coming in by the door, and the space grew less and less. Then, at length, in his anguish, he cried as loud as he could, "Bring me no more fodder! Bring me no more fodder!" The maid was just milking the cow, and when she heard someone speaking and saw no one, and perceived that it was the same voice that she had heard in the night, she was so terrified that she slipped off her stool and spilt her milk. She ran in great haste to her master and said, "Oh heavens, pastor, the cow has been speaking." "Thou art mad," replied the pastor, but he went himself to the byre to see what was there. Hardly, however, had he set foot inside when Tom Thumb cried again, "Bring me no more fodder! Bring me no more fodder!" Then the pastor himself was alarmed, and thought that an evil spirit had gone into the cow, and ordered her to be killed. She was killed, but the stomach in which Tom Thumb was thrown on the midden. Tom Thumb had great difficulty in working his way. However, he succeeded so far as to get some room. But just as he was going to thrust his head out, a new misfortune occurred. A hungry wolf ran thither and swallowed the whole stomach at one gulp. Tom Thumb did not lose courage. "Perhaps," thought he, "the wolf will listen to what I have got to say." And he called to him from out of the stomach, "Dear wolf, I know of a magnificent feast for thee." "Where is it to be had?" said the wolf. "In such and such a house. Thou must creep into it through a kitchen sink, and wilt find cakes and bacon and sausages, and as much of them as thou canst eat." And he described to him exactly his father's house. The wolf did not require to be told this twice, squeezed himself in the night through the sink, and ate to his heart's content in the larder. When he had eaten his fill, he went to go out again. But he had become so big that he could not go out the same way. Tom Thumb had reckoned on this, and now began to make a violent noise in the wolf's body, and raged and screamed as loudly as he could. "Wilt thou be quiet?" said the wolf. "Thou wilt waken up the people." What?" replied the little fellow. "Thou hast eaten thy fill, and I will make merry likewise?" and began once more to scream with all his strength. At last his father and mother were aroused by it, and ran to the room and looked in through the opening in the door. When they saw that a wolf was inside, they ran away, and the husband fetched his axe, and the wife the scythe. "Stay behind," said the man, when they entered the room. "When I have given him a blow, if he is not killed by it, thou must cut him down with hew his body to pieces." Then Tom Thumb heard his parents' voices and cried, "Dear father, I am here. I am in the wolf's body." Said the father, full of joy, "Thank God, our dear child has found us again," and bade the woman take away her scythe, that Tom Thumb might not be hurt with it. After that he raised his arm and struck the wolf with such a blow on his head that he fell down dead. And then they got knives and scissors and cut his body open, and drew the little fellow forth. "Ah," said the father, "what sorrow we have gone through for thy sake." "Yes, father, I have gone about the world a great deal. Thank heaven I breathe fresh air again." "Where hast thou been?" "Ah, father, I have been in a mouse's hole, in a cow's stomach, and then a wolf's. Now I will stay with you. And we will not sell thee again, no, not for all the riches in the world. And his parents, and he embraced and kissed their dear Tom Thumb. They gave him to eat and to drink, and had some new clothes made for him, for his own had been spoiled on his journey. So that was Tom Thumb. Now let's break it down. What is Tom Thumb really about? On the surface, it's got all the makings of a wild ride. Thieves, a talking cow, getting swallowed whole, and even escaping from inside a wolf. But underneath all that chaos, there are some pretty interesting themes that still hit home today. One of the biggest takeaways from Tom Thumb is that size doesn't matter. Brains do. Tom is tiny, sure, but that never holds him back. In fact, his smallness is often what gets him out of trouble. He sneaks, he hides, he outsmarts the bad guys at every turn. He doesn't need brute strength, he just needs quick thinking. Now, think about how this plays out in the real world. We see this all the time. People underestimated because they don't fit the expected mold. Maybe they're physically small, or maybe they're just the underdog in some way. But how often do those same people rise to the challenge, using creativity and wit to succeed? Whether it's in sports, business, or even everyday life, the ones who think outside the box usually come out on top. Now, Tom's story is packed with trouble. Some of it he causes, and some of it just seems to find him. But what makes him different from other fairy tale characters is that he never really plays the victim. When he gets sold to the thieves, he tricks them instead of feeling helpless. When he ends up in the stomach of a cow, he doesn't panic. He figures out how to make enough noise to get himself out. This kind of problem solving is something that we all need, right? Life throws us into tricky situations all the time. Maybe not in the stomach of a cow tricky, but you get the idea. The ability to stay cool under pressure and think your way out of a bad spot is something that never goes out of style. Tom's parents clearly love him, and they try to protect him. But from the start, Tom is determined to do things his own way. He wants to explore, to prove himself, and to make his own choices. And even though he goes through some seriously terrifying situations, he doesn't let fear hold him back. This is something a lot of us, I think, can relate to, especially as kids start growing up and pushing for more independence. It's that balance between staying safe and taking risks, something Tom definitely leans way into. But in the end, his journey teaches him something, and he does find his way back home, proving that sometimes stepping out into the world helps you grow in ways you never expected. Now, here's where things get interesting. Fairy tales love to teach lessons, and in Tom Thumb, we see a pretty clear example of karma in action. The thieves, they think they're going to use Tom to steal, but he outsmarts them. The wolf, he swallows Tom whole, and how does that end? Well, with Tom leading it right into a trap. The message is clear. If you act out of greed or selfishness, it's going to come back to bite you, literally in the wolf's case. And honestly, this lesson has not aged a day. In real life, we see people trying to take shortcuts or trick their way to success, but it almost always backfires. Meanwhile, those who rely on intelligence and persistence, like Tom, tend to find their way to success. Maybe not by getting cut out of a wolf, but you get the idea. And now let's talk about Tom's parents for a second. They just had to have a child, even if he was no bigger than a thumb. And sure, they got what they wanted. but it came with way more than they bargained for. And this is such a classic fairy tale theme. How many times have we seen stories where people make a wish only to realize that getting exactly what they wanted isn't as great as they had thought it would be? It's a reminder that sometimes we don't always think about the consequences of what we're asking for. It's like that saying, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Now, at its core, Tom Thumb is a story of survival, wit, and making the best out of what you've got. In a world that still loves an underdog story, think about movies, sports, even viral social media moments. Tom's journey feels just as relevant now as it did back then. We live here in a time where people can break expectations every day. Someone might be underestimated because of their background, their appearance, or even just their quiet nature. But time and time again, those people prove that intelligence, creativity, and perseverance matter way more than how big, loud, or physically strong you are. And hey, while we don't recommend getting swallowed by a wolf to prove your point, taking a page from Tom's book, staying sharp, staying clever, and never letting size or circumstance define you is always a good look. What do you think? Have you ever had a Tom Thumb moment where you had to outthink a tough situation? Let us know. And that wraps up this episode of Real Talk, Grimm Edition. I hope you enjoyed diving into the story of Tom Thumb and its deeper meanings as much as I did. Now, if you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you have thoughts on today's tale, whether you agree with me, you disagree, or just have your own take, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach out to me on social media at Real Talk on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky, or send me an email to therealrealtalk@gmail.com. Let me know what you think, or just to say hi. And if you're enjoying the show, consider leaving a rating or a review. It really helps others to find us and keep the Real Talk Grimm Edition conversation going. Now, next time, we're going to continue on this Tom Thumb ride with the sequel, Tom Thumb as Journeyman. But for now, thank you for listening, and until next time, stay curious, question the stories around you, and keep exploring the darker side of fairy tales.